Imagine walking through the streets of a city that has become the world's most famous symbol of urban resilience. You see renovated stadiums, bustling tech hubs, and restored historic theaters. But then, you turn a corner and look up, and your heart skips a beat. Rising out of the concrete like a skeletal finger pointed at the sky is a $900 million nightmare. This is a structure that was promised to be the ultimate sign of a new era, a vertical city that would crown the skyline with luxury and pride. Instead, construction simply stopped. There were no grand announcements, no local news crews covering a bankruptcy hearing, just a sudden, eerie silence. Crane height adjusted one last time, the workers walked off the site, and the gates were locked. But here is where it gets truly bizarre. In the years since the machines went silent, the paperwork for this nearly billion-dollar asset has vanished into a localized Bermuda Triangle of shell companies, offshore accounts, and forgotten deeds. If you ask the city, they point to a holding company. If you ask the holding company, they point to a private equity firm in Europe. If you ask the firm, they claim the assets were sold years ago. This is the story of Detroit's most expensive ghost, a skyscraper that was abandoned mid-construction, and the terrifying reality that in the world of high-stakes megaprojects, a building this big can actually become anonymous. When you think of Detroit, you think of a city that knows how to build things, from the assembly lines that put the world on wheels, to the massive Art Deco towers that defined the early 20th century. This is a place built on heavy industry and bold ambition. So, when a new mega-project was announced with a $900 million price tag, the city was ready to embrace it. The renderings were spectacular. It was supposed to be a blend of high-end residential units, a boutique hotel, and floating garden terraces that would allow residents to look out over the river toward Canada. It wasn't just a building. It was a statement that the darkest days of the city were over. Investors from across the globe poured money into the foundation, literally and figuratively. For the first few months, it was a hive of activity. The foundation was poured, the massive steel pillars were anchored into the bedrock, and the first 15 floors rose with incredible speed. It looked like a success story in the making. But then, the momentum shifted. It started with small delays, shipments of glass that didn't arrive, specialized concrete that was held up at the border. Then, the payroll checks started to lag. The workers, many of whom had been part of Detroit's construction backbone for decades, knew the signs before the public did. A project of this scale needs a constant, massive flow of liquid cash to stay alive. When that flow turns into a trickle, the heartbeat of the project begins to fade. One Tuesday morning in late autumn, the site was simply still. No saws, no hammers, no shouting, just the wind whistling through the exposed steel. The most unsettling part of an abandoned construction site is the sense of frozen time. When a building is finished and then abandoned, it feels like a ruin. But when a building is abandoned while it is being born, it feels like a tragedy. You can see the wooden forms still wrapped around half-poured concrete columns. You can see the temporary elevators hanging halfway up the structure, swaying slightly in the breeze. There are pallets of expensive materials sitting on the upper floors, exposed to the rain and the snow, slowly rotting away because no one is there to install them. This isn't just a waste of money. It's a waste of potential. As the months turned into years, the mystery of the ownerless tower began to grow. Normally, when a project fails, the bank steps in. They foreclose on the property, they look for a new developer, and they try to salvage their investment. But with this $900 million skyscraper, the legal trail is so convoluted that the banks themselves seem afraid to touch it. It appears the original developers used a common but dangerous tactic called tiered ownership. The building isn't owned by one person or one company. It is owned by a company that is owned by a trust, which is owned by another company registered in a tax haven, which is managed by a board of directors that hasn't met in half a decade. This creates a legal no man's land. The city wants the eyesore finished or torn down, but they can't find a physical person to serve a summons to. The taxes go unpaid, but the penalties just pile up on a ledger that no one is reading. This is the dark side of international finance in the real estate world. Buildings are no longer structures meant to house people. They are assets on a spreadsheet, moved around like chess pieces to offset losses or hide profits. In this case, the building became a bad asset that was passed around so many times that everyone lost track of who was holding the hot potato when the music stopped. For the people of Detroit, this isn't just a curiosity, it's a safety concern. High-rise construction sites are not meant to stay open to the elements for years. Steel begins to oxidize, and while it takes a long time for a skyscraper to become structurally unsound, the specialized connectors and the temporary supports are not designed for a multi-year winter. Every season that passes makes the eventual cost of restarting the project exponentially higher. A developer who might have bought the shell for $200 million 3 years ago now looks at the rust and the water damage and realizes it would be cheaper to tear it down and start over. But tearing down a 15-story steel and concrete skeleton in the middle of a dense urban center is a $30 million job in itself. Who is going to pay for that? Certainly not the anonymous entities hiding behind layers of paperwork. Let's look at the psychology of the failing megaproject. Why do developers keep pushing these vertical cities when the data shows they are incredibly risky? It comes down to ego and the sunk cost fallacy. When you have already spent $300 million on the foundation and the first few floors, it is very hard to admit that the project is no longer viable. You keep hoping for a miracle, a massive tech company to sign a pre-lease, a government subsidy, or a sudden spike in the luxury condo market. You keep spending just enough to keep the lights on until you simply can't anymore. In the case of this Detroit tower, the timing was the ultimate enemy. It was conceived in a period of low interest rates and high optimism. As the world economy shifted, the luxury market in Detroit became saturated. People wanted renovated historic lofts, not cold, modern glass towers. The product this building was offering no longer matched what the people wanted. It was a 2018 solution to a 2024 world. Think about the impact this has on the surrounding businesses. A bustling construction site brings hundreds of workers who buy lunch, coffee, and supplies. A finished skyscraper brings thousands of residents and employees who support the local economy. But an abandoned shell brings nothing. It creates a dead zone on the street. Pedestrians avoid the block because the sidewalk sheds are dark and feel unsafe. Neighboring property values drop because nobody wants to look out their window at a rusting cage of steel. The $900 million ghost is essentially a black hole, sucking the economic energy out of several surrounding city blocks. What makes this specific building so haunting is its height. It is tall enough that you can see it from miles away. It sits on the horizon like a broken promise. On a foggy morning, the top floors disappear into the clouds, making it look like an ancient ruin from a civilization that never actually reached its peak. It has become a waypoint for urban explorers and drone pilots who venture into the empty floors to film the decay. The footage they bring back is surreal. There are stacks of drywall that have turned into piles of mush. There are graffiti tags 20 stories up, left by people who risked their lives to climb a building that shouldn't even exist. Inside the shell, the silence is heavy. In a normal building, you hear the hum of electricity and the vibration of the plumbing. Here, you only hear the wind and the occasional clack-clack of a loose piece of metal hitting a beam. It's a purely industrial sound, devoid of any human rhythm. It is a reminder that we build these giants to serve us, but when we leave, they become something else entirely. They become monuments to our own limitations. The question of ownership is the most frustrating part for local activists. There have been many attempts to crowdsource the mystery, with amateur investigators digging through public records to find the ultimate beneficiary. They find names of lawyers in Zurich and accountants in the Cayman Islands, but every lead ends in a dead end. It is a masterclass in corporate obfuscation. If you owe the city $10,000 in property taxes on a house, they will take your house. But if a project owes the city $10 million and is owned by a complex web of international entities, the legal system seems to grind to a halt. The scale of the failure actually protects the failure. This is a recurring theme in the history of failing megaprojects. We see it in the unfinished luxury resorts of the Caribbean and the ghost cities of various regions around the world. When the investment is large enough, it becomes a geopolitical issue rather than a local real estate one. The Detroit skyscraper is a victim of a system that allows money to move instantly across borders, while the physical consequences of that money are left to rot in a local neighborhood. Imagine if that $900 million had been spent differently. That amount of money could have renovated 5,000 historic homes in the surrounding neighborhoods. It could have funded a world-class transit system or built dozens of new community centers. Instead, it is locked in a vertical graveyard. This is where we need to analyze these projects, not just to marvel at the scale of the disaster, but to understand the opportunity cost. Every dollar spent on a failing ego project is a dollar that isn't being spent on the real needs of a city. There is a term in architecture called architecture. It refers to the trend of hiring a world-famous architect to design a building that is so unique and striking that it becomes a tourist destination in itself. The Detroit Tower was meant to be one of these. Its curves and its cantilevered sections were supposed to be Instagrammable. But the problem with complex, unique designs is that they are incredibly expensive to build. You can't just use standard parts. Every piece of glass has to be custom cut. Every steel joint is a one-of-a-kind engineering challenge. When the money started to dry up, there was no way to value engineer the project. It was all or nothing, and as we can see, it became nothing. So, what is the future for this ownerless tower? There are a few scenarios. The first, and most likely, is that it continues to sit for another several years until the legal fog clears. Eventually, a judge will have to make a landmark ruling to allow the city to seize the property despite the tiered ownership. At that point, the building will likely be sold at a massive loss to a developer who will have the heartbreaking task of assessing the damage. The second scenario is more dramatic. If the structural integrity begins to fail, the city may be forced to declare an emergency and use public funds to dismantle it. This would be a massive blow to the taxpayers, who would essentially be paying to clean up the mess of international investors. It is an unfair burden, but it is one that many cities have had to face when large-scale developments go sour. The third, and most optimistic scenario, is that the lost owner finally emerges. Perhaps a large-scale merger or an acquisition of the hidden parent company will bring the building back into a visible portfolio. A new billionaire looking for a legacy project might decide that finishing the Detroit Ghost is the ultimate comeback story. After all, the city loves a comeback. But with every winter that passes, this scenario becomes less likely. The building isn't just a shell, it's a deteriorating asset that is losing value every single day. As we watch this project, we have to ask ourselves, how can we prevent this from happening again? Many urban planners are calling for construction bonds. This would require developers to put a massive amount of cash into an escrow account before they even break ground. If they abandon the project, that money is used by the city to either finish the building or safely remove the structure. It's a simple solution, but it's one that many developers fight against because it ties up lure capital. But without these protections, cities like Detroit are left holding the bag for the world's most expensive abandoned hobbies. The story of the $900 million skyscraper is a lens through which we can see the flaws in our modern financial system. It shows a world where money has become disconnected from physical reality. To an investor in a high-rise office in London, the Detroit project is just a line on a screen that they might have written off years ago. But to the person walking to work in Detroit, it is a physical, imposing reality that affects their daily life. This disconnect is at the heart of why megaprojects fail. They are often built by people who will never walk through the doors, funded by people who will never see the skyline, and abandoned by people who don't have to live with the consequences. When the sun goes down over the Detroit River, the city lights up. You see the Renaissance Center, the Alley Detroit Center, and the Penobscot Building. They look magnificent. But then your eye hits the dark gap in the skyline. The $900 million ghost doesn't have any lights. It's a silhouette, a shadow that reminds everyone of what happens when ambition isn't backed by accountability. It is a monument to the almost. It almost became a hotel. It almost housed hundreds of people. It almost changed the city. In the world of urban exploration, this building is a legend. There are stories of explorers finding blueprints still rolled up on tables, covered in dust. They find tools that were just left behind, as if the workers were raptured off the site. There is a strange, quiet dignity in the abandoned tools. They represent the labor of real people. People who were proud to be building something great for their city, only to be let down by the invisible forces of global finance. If you ever find yourself in Detroit, take a moment to look for it. It isn't hard to find. It's the one that looks like it's waiting for something that's never going to come. It's the one that's stuck in the middle of a sentence. It's the $900 million skyscraper that nobody knows who owns anymore. It's a warning, a mystery, and a tragedy, all wrapped in rusted steel and unfinished concrete. The lessons here are profound. For cities, the lesson is to verify the stability and transparency of developers before handing over the keys to the skyline. For investors, the lesson is that too big to fail is a myth, especially when you are building in a city that is still finding its new identity. And for the rest of us, it's a reminder that our world is built on a foundation of trust and paperwork. And when those things vanish, Even a billion-dollar tower can disappear into the cracks. What happens when a city stops trusting the cranes on its horizon? That is the real casualty here. Every time a project like this fails, it makes it harder for the next developer with a genuine plan to get started. It creates a climate of skepticism. But Detroit is a city that has seen worse. It has seen entire industries vanish and has still found a way to reinvent itself. Perhaps in some strange way, the abandoned tower will eventually become part of that story. Maybe it will be transformed into something no one expected, a vertical park, an art installation, or a symbol of a new kind of urban development that values transparency over height. Until that day comes, the ghost will continue to stand. It will face the Michigan winters, it will watch the ships go by on the river, and it will keep its secrets. It is a silent witness to a moment of overreach, a billion-dollar question mark sitting in the middle of a neighborhood that is trying to move forward. We may never know who the ultimate owner is, but we know who the real owners are now, the people of Detroit, who have to look at it every day and decide what their vision for the future truly is. The story of the ownerless tower is a chapter in the larger book of modern urban history. It's a chapter that isn't finished yet, much like the building itself. But by looking at it, by talking about it, and by demanding better from the systems that built it, we can ensure that the next time a $900 million dream starts to rise, it actually reaches the top. We owe it to the workers who left their tools, the city that gave it space, and the skyline that deserves a crown, not a skeleton. This is the reality of the failing megaproject. It's not just about the money lost. It's about the trust broken. It's a story of glass and steel, but more importantly, it's a story of people and their city. As the wind continues to blow through the empty 15th floor, let's hope it carries the message that we are watching and we are learning. Detroit has survived many things, and it will survive this ghost, too. But the lesson of the abandoned skyscraper is one that will linger long after the last rusted beam is finally removed or covered in glass. The height of our buildings should be matched by the depth of our commitment to the communities they stand in. Anything less is just a $900 million mistake.